Welcome back to Math 103. This is video number 13 on voting. Let's consider an example of the I.I.A. criterion, the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion, in action. That will require looking at a situation in which there is an initial election and a revote under certain special circumstances, which we'll get to. So the scenario here is that the method of pairwise comparisons is applied to an 8-member award committee that is looking to determine who is the best stand-up comedian at Rutgers. The candidates are Anne, Bob, Claire, and Dave. They will all perform. The committee will cast ballots, and let us suppose that this is the resulting preference table. Our task now is to find the winner under the method of pairwise comparisons. I encourage you to pause here and compute this winner on your own before continuing. So we start by writing out each of the various head-to-head competitions, just what are the matchups that we need to consider, and for each such matchup, each such head-to-head competition, we consider who is the winner. We start with Anne versus Bob. We see that there are 2, 4, 5 voters who prefer Anne to Bob, and only 1, 2, 3 voters who rank Bob higher than Anne. Therefore, Anne is the winner of that head-to-head competition. Similarly, Anne versus Claire, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voters who rank Anne higher than Claire, so that too is most of the voters. Anne versus Dave works out a little bit differently. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voters who rank Dave higher than Anne, so Dave wins this head-to-head competition. Bob versus Claire. In the case of Bob versus Claire, Bob has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voters who rank him higher, and Claire only 3 who rank her higher, so that makes Bob the winner there. Bob versus Dave. So here we have Bob has 1, 2, 3, 4 votes placing him higher, 4 preference ballots placing him higher, whereas Dave is higher on these 4 preference ballots. He's higher than Bob, so Bob versus Dave is actually a tie. That can happen. That means that each player here, each candidate, is getting half a point. And so thus far, Anne has 2 points, Bob now has 1.5 points, Dave has 1.5 points, and finally, Claire versus Dave. We see that Claire comes out ahead because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ballots on which Claire has the advantage. So Claire is the winner there, and we see that Anne has 2 points and no one else has 2 points. Dave has 1.5, Bob has 1.5, Claire has 1, so we conclude that Anne wins the election here. Now suppose that for some reason Claire is disqualified from this competition. For example, it turns out that she wasn't actually a Rutgers student in the first place, she wasn't really eligible for the competition, so we really have to do the whole thing over again. But the preference ballots contain all the information we need to write what the new preference table will be in light of Claire's disqualification. So these 2 voters, for example, still have the same relative rankings of their candidates. All that's happened is that Claire has been dismissed, so Bob is still the first choice, Anne is still the second choice, but Dave is now the third choice. And in a similar vein, those 2 voters who had Claire at the top of their ballot now move everyone up 1 spot. This is similar, but not identical, to what we did in the instant runoff voting method. Now, it's important to understand that we are not applying the instant runoff voting method right now. We are not eliminating a candidate for some particular reason, like having the fewest first-place votes. We are instead playing out a scenario in which a certain candidate is disqualified for some other reason. We're seeing what the preference table now turns into as a result. And there it is. Okay, we now have the preference table of election number 2, the revote, which results from Claire's disqualification. So we go on to find the winner of the revote under the method of pairwise comparisons. As for A versus B, we have these 5 voters. 2 plus 2 plus 1 is 5 voters who rank A higher than B. Only 3 voters, 3 committee members rank B higher than A. Therefore, A is the winner there. In the head-to-head competition between A and D, we see that D wins. We see that there are 5 voters who rank D higher than A, so D is the winner there. And finally, B versus D turns out to be a tie. Right? There are 2 voters here, plus 1 more, plus 1 more. That's 4 voters who have B higher than D, but another 4 voters have D higher than B. Therefore, this one is a tie. So how does it all work out? A has 1 point from beating B. B has half a point from tying D, and D, Dave, has 1.5 points, and therefore Dave is the winner. So what just happened? Here's the summary. Anne won the original election. Then Claire, who was not the winner of the original election, she lost the original election, but she was disqualified, and then because Claire was no longer around, suddenly Dave becomes the winner, and Anne loses. So what conclusion follows from these results about the method of pairwise comparisons and the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion? These election results violate the I.I.A. criterion. Now, to be clear, why exactly? So Claire is an irrelevant alternative, a candidate who was not a winner in the original election. So quite apart from dropping out of the contest, even before she dropped out, she was not going to be the winner. Since the effect of having an irrelevant alternative removed from the election, removed from the list of candidates in the revote, since the effect of that is to change the original winner into a non-winner, these election results violate the I.I.A. criterion. Right, so it was the method of pairwise comparisons that brought this absurdity to you. Therefore, we conclude that this method sometimes violates the I.I.A. criterion. It turns out that all of the methods we have considered thus far sometimes violate the I.I.A. criterion. What does all of this have to do with fairness as such? Well, think of it from Anne's point of view. If you were Anne and you won that original election, and then, just because Claire got disqualified, you ended up losing in the end, think how outraged you would be at the unfairness of that result. To make sure that we've really understood this last fairness criterion, before going on to the next video, answer the following 2 questions. Suppose that it isn't Claire who is disqualified. Suppose that Anne, after winning the original election, is disqualified for some reason. Now we ask, who is the winner of the revote in light of this disqualification of Anne? That's question number 1. If Anne is disqualified, who wins instead? The second question is, what conclusion follows from this latest election result about the method of pairwise comparisons and the independence of irrelevant alternatives criterion? In other words, not the previous election before and election after, but this election before and election after, with Anne disqualified. What does that tell you about the I.I.A. criterion?